And if this is in the traditional disciplines, we'll patent it. If we find that the core is just data processing, we'll not patent it. That was approach until the early 90s. Then the EPO took a different approach. German courts followed for a while, and in about 2000, when the EPO largely adopted the case law as it is now, the basic approach, the German court said, no, we will not follow this, and in a way they went back to this core doctrine. With a slight modification, now they said, well, we take the claim, we strike out everything that looks non-technical, everything that looks like excluded subject matter, like presentation of information, computer programs, and then we examine the rest. If you take this to the extreme, the rest is, of course, a naked computer, or at least the prior art that was already known. Quite frequently, the improvement is in the computer program, which makes the whole thing a bit critical. A further school of thought, which is basically fostered by the Federal Patent Court, which is the lower instance. Appeals from the Federal Patent Court go to the Federal Court of Justice. And they, in a nutshell, hold the notion, well, patentable is only hardware or its operation. Okay, we see that is a bit too restrictive, but it should be at least close to hardware. We are a bit flexible in this regard, but when it comes to application software, we'll draw the line. And generally, these people hold that data processing is not technical. And then, of course, we have the EPO approach, which technically should not affect the German courts, because it's an independent deciding body. German courts review independently, but of course you cannot go about invalidating European patents as a matter of routine and take a scheme, an examination scheme that leads to completely opposite results. I've outlined the EPO approach as Dr. Steinbrenner just explained it to you in a nutshell, so to speak. Basically, the first hurdle, one technical feature overcomes the exclusions, and then you take the technical features and you make the normal examination for novelty and inventive step. Just to outline the map a little bit, I put together the major players, or the players, and you can see the Federal Court of Justice in the middle between the Federal Patent Court and the EPO. That's by purpose, in a way. On the one hand, they shouldn't contradict the EPO too much. On the other hand, they can't go about and setting aside each and any decision that's coming up from the Federal Patent Court. So they're steering a middle course, and in my perception also, what we have is people are thinking differently within the Federal Court of Justice. There's some people who think that the EPO approach, as it's practiced, is good, and some others rather think we should be more restrictive and more close to the core doctrine. And that, for a practitioner, makes it a bit difficult to predict things. The basic approach, as it is represented in the slide, looks very much different, very similar to the EPO approach. But you notice a slight difference. We have actually 3 hurdles. The first is technical character, and here, like the EPO, the presence of one technical feature is sufficient. That is, if you reside a computer, a router, whatever, a network in the computer, in the claim, then you've passed this hurdle. The hurdle of exclusions, differently from the EPO, is not exactly overcome by one technical feature, but Federal Court of Justice said repeatedly, you need to have a solution of a concrete technical problem by technical means. You've heard this already. It's similar to the EPO, but not exact. It's first in a different context, and second, there's the word concrete, which plays a role in decisions as well. But once you have passed this hurdle, then you take the technical subject matter that you have identified and subject it to the examination of the solution you have found for novelty inventive step in view of the prior art. I already said if this looks very similar to what the EPO does, but how you apply this is sometimes a bit different, and for the last 3 or 4 years we have seen swings going more in the direction of EPO and swings more into the traditional line. And I will introduce briefly some 5 or 6 decisions that basically illustrate this. These are the latest reported decisions by the FCJ to my knowledge. It started after a long series of decisions whether or not you should establish some core with a decision of 2010 which established the examination scheme that I just presented to you. It came up from the Federal Patent Court on the question whether actually only modifications of hardware can be patented. Basically, this was a case about the transformation of documents from one format into another. The background was that with the advent of smartphones and other handheld devices which had a lower computing capability than a personal computer or even a desktop, processing certain electronic documents took too long, and the invention was about automatically translating these documents into a format that these less powerful devices could process more easily and without delays for the user. Obviously, the hardware was the same, and the invention basically resided in some kind of program that was running and transforming the documents. Federal Patent Court said no change of hardware, but we'll set it up, we allow the appeal, and Federal Court of Justice said no, you don't need to recite a change in hardware, nor do the individual components that you use, that you recite in the claim have a new use. You can combine known hardware components, use them for what they are known to be used, but the combination can still be patentable, as, by the way, is usually in patent law in general. A combination of known features can be inventive, and when you're dealing with the traditional arts, all components you're using are known somehow, and it's always the combination that makes the invention. At this time, the court, emphasized something that was before, that they said, generally you avoid the exclusion of presentation of information, programs for computers, etc., if you have a technical solution to a technical problem. And as we perceived it at the time, they gave 2 examples. The first one was the program is determined by technical entities outside the computer, that is, somehow the computer is controlling a machine, or a machine is providing input to the computer that is processing data given by the machine, or, which was the case here, the program takes into account the technical features of a data processing system. In this case, the program took into account that these new devices were less powerful, and accordingly made an adjustment for that. The next decision we got was still very much along the lines of the EPO. It related to a navigation system where basically you had a different representation of a map, and you can dispute whether or not this was something that needed to be considered as a technical feature or not. But importantly, the court said, again, reiterated the principle you need to have a technical solution to a technical problem, but then they said, but when we go to inventive step, we only examine the technical features. More precisely, only features determining or influencing the solution of a technical problem are relevant for inventive step. And the features that are completely unrelated to any technical problem will stay outside and can be used to define the problem. That's something I think Dr. Steinbrenner did not go into, but which is the standard approach of the EPO according to the Convic decision. So far, so good. Practitioners relaxed and said, okay, now we have a more or less uniform practice. And then we had a decision in 2011 which said in so many words that data processing they do not consider technical nor solving any technical problem. more or less literally quoted, a technical problem is not solved if you use known techniques. In this case, it was the cookie technology, and you just do not more than data processing. And so that they are very clear. They said, by the way, we do not consider the following as solutions to technical problems, for example, sampling processing, storing transmitting data, usual data processing step, and then, that's an important one, improvement of user-machine interaction. So basically, input-output with a user is not a technical problem in the book of this panel. We may ask, what is then a technical problem? And they gave a list. 3 items, 2 of them we have seen already, and the first one is basically hardware and modification thereof. That is the traditional machine-oriented approach, which was not so exciting as such, but the decision made it fairly clear that this panel that was deciding this considered this as an exclusive list. In other words, if you cannot relate your subject matter to any of these 3 problems, there is no other problem that you can invoke. And it also made clear, adapted to technical features of a computer, that's not related to data processing in the context of this invention. So basically, any difficulties you may have in data processing, forget. This third decision was rendered by a different panel that existed at the time, was also a different composition. It was unclear now which tendency, the first 2 or the last one, would prevail. The last decisions we had from the FCJ basically point in the latter direction. Basically, we had now again 3 decisions in 2012, 2013, again on navigation systems. As to the special case, probably all were right, but the reasoning, in my view, was more in the line of the last decision, and as I'm representing computer-implemented inventions as a practitioner, a bit disturbing. The first one, by the way, it was some kind of almost ludicrous subject matter. It was a navigation system that automatically selected a certain location in a town if there was no street register for this town in the navigation system, some small village, so it would put you to the city center. Really not rocket science, and in my book, not really an invention. That was not the issue, but one of the arguments that were made in this case, well, you reduce the number of input operation for a user, and the court said, no, this is not a technical problem. If the user has an easier life, ergonomics, whatever, that's not a technical problem in our book. Next was, again, the decision in late 2012, actually rendered on the same day. And here it was a bit more complex. Basically, the navigation system calculated a route, and then it presented the sections of the route to a user, and the user could select, I want this section, for example, if it's a toll road, I select it or decline it. And then there were some alternatives. Basically, traditional input-output, a user interface, and the court said in so many words, this is just a step of displaying information. We don't consider the whole user interface, neither the output on the screen nor the input by a user. And then, of course, that was the invention. So what was left was just the prior art, the normal navigation system. Of course, the patent was found invalid. And the third one, again, that was a bit a very thin invention. Again, not really an invention in my book. Basically, it said, well, as a change over the prior art, the navigation system will tell you, give an audio output of a street name, rather than only a visual output. Really not rocket science. And here again, basically they said this is reproduction of information, we will not consider this. So what's the conclusion? For now, graphical user interfaces are considered very critically by FCJ, and if I were to advise a client right now, I would say, well, prepare for an uphill struggle. On the long run, it may be that the court will stay with these 3 strict categories, applied strictly, not consider any data processing steps. From the history of the case law, which I didn't show you in all full beauty, we've seen many swings, and it may very well be that someday they will say, well, these were decisions related to navigation systems, and if you applied these more generally, you misunderstood us. That has to be seen, and that's also a matter how the political climate and, of course, the opinion within the board develop. Thank you very much.